Hey everyone, my name is AJ. I'm a designer and rug maker. I make my rugs using this tufting gun. Like all good things that are worth doing, using this machine does come with its challenges. Today, I want to share some solutions to some potential tufting troubles that you might run into on your tufting journey. So I hope that this video can serve as kind of a reference guide for just the most common tufting troubles that folks generally run into. You can use the timestamps below to reference specific issues that you might be running into. A lot of the solutions to these problems are just general best practices when it comes to tufting, so I think it's really helpful to improve your technique. I'm also working on an exciting project today. I'm creating a piece that's going to accompany my Become the Sky arch rug that I did a process video of, which I will link for you here. Yeah, I made a second one of those, and the piece that I'm working on today is going to accompany that Become the Sky piece in a gallery in Los Angeles. And so I'm really stoked about that. I will definitely link the details below for those who are in the area and interested in checking it out. Yeah, I thought I could kind of work on this project and also share all of my tips. Some of the problems we're going to discuss: what do I do when my cloth is ripping? Why isn't my yarn sticking into the cloth? Why aren't my loops a consistent height? Why does the yarn keep falling out of the gun? So annoying. Why is my machine beeping? And also, why is my gun getting pushed out of my cloth? And then lastly, why is my cut pile not cutting? Before we get to that, I'm going to map out my design for this rug that I'm making. I have Adobe Illustrator open here, which is the design software that I use to design my rugs. And typically I use a projector to project them onto my canvas, which is my tufting fabric stretched across the frame. But today I'm gonna freehand it because this is pretty simple, but I'm gonna do that real quick and then we will get into our solutions to your tufting troubles. Well, I did a pretty crappy job of drawing my design on, but we're gonna go with it. I realized I started too high up, probably just fill the space with other things. Hi, buddy. Before we get started, I really just want to take a moment and suggest that we all just take a deep breath. If you have been experiencing some problems getting started with tufting, I know how easy it is to feel very frustrated and discouraged. I just want to encourage you to take a moment when you do feel that frustration coming on. Pay attention to your body and any places that you might be holding tension, especially when you're feeling frustrated. It's easy to tense up. I am just a firm believer that, I think this goes for any craft, but tufting is going to feel much easier and more pleasurable when you feel good in your body. I think you will find that you have an easier time when you have a more lighthearted mentality and you maintain curiosity, because at the end of the day, there will be issues that you run into. It's just part of the learning experience. Yeah, I just encourage you to maybe just take a dance break, take a water break, take a walk, and return to your frame when you feel better and when you're ready to problem solve and be curious in your approach. All right. Thank you for the cuddles, sir, but you must go now. Okay. So, a lot of these problems that we're going to discuss today can be solved with the same solution. There's sort of a number of things that you can do that will solve a lot of your common problems. Number one, the cloth is ripping when I try to tuft. Now, this is a very commonly asked question. I know how frustrating that can be. Holes are really hard to patch. Unless they're small, they're really, really challenging to fix. So it's kind of like you're wasting your resources. If you are just getting started, you should assume that you're going to need a tester canvas. I suggest having a piece of cloth that you use as your practice space instead of just kind of going straight into making a rug that you're really excited about. And then you can actually take that off the frame and then put more cloth on to actually create a rug. And if you ever feel like your technique is struggling a little bit, you can just put that practice canvas back on your frame and do a little bit more practicing. Some solutions to this problem: pull your cloth as tight as you possibly can. You'll see here at the bottom, I'm being very risky because this cloth was like just the perfect amount of size for my frame. I would prefer to have more inches down here, but I cannot physically pull this any tighter. I mean, it's like, maybe right here I can, yeah. Once you have your fabric on your frame, go through every single nail on these teeth and pull even more. Okay, so cloth tight as freaking possible. Number 2, make sure that the grid of your cloth is properly vertical and horizontal across the entire canvas. You want that grid to be as straight as possible, so these lines really help, but you also want to make sure that you're looking at the actual threads of the fabric as well. Second item related to cloth is maybe you're actually not using the right cloth. This here is called tufting fabric. I get mine from Tuft the World, which you can use code MAGIC15 for 15% off. I love this stuff. This is my absolute favorite. There are a number of people who reach out to me asking about why their fabric is ripping, and I've found that they're using monk's cloth instead of tufting fabric. It's a little bit confusing because sometimes tufting fabric like this is sold as monk's cloth, but I think it's more common for this to be referred to as tufting fabric. And then something like this is monk's cloth. I would not recommend purchasing monk's cloth if it looks like this, because what you need for tufting is for the holes of the fabric to open and allow the gun to stick in. And you'll see that like I cannot move these fibers enough to create any kind of hole. For tufting, you really need something like this where the fibers are going to open easily so that the gun can fit in. And so you can see how if you're using this and the gun is trying to push into fibers that won't budge, then it might start ripping it because it has no other option but to rip it. There's no give to those fibers. If you are experiencing a lot of holes, then perhaps you're not using the right fabric. The next solution, if your cloth is ripping, is maybe you're moving too fast with inconsistent pressure. A note on speed: here's my cut pile gun. You'll notice this little dial here. I got my gun from tuftinggun.com, so I don't know if this is consistent with every single gun, but on this machine, the AK1, and it's also on the AK2, there's a dial here that you can turn, which changes the speed of the gun. This is where I keep it. If I turn it counterclockwise, it's going to speed up. No, that is way too freaking fast. My comfortable spot is to have the little tick mark on the knob facing this way. So facing forward. That's pretty nice for me. So yeah, make sure that knob is turned forward. You could even slow it down a little if you really want to. That'd be fine. But then you also want to make sure that your hand isn't going too fast. You want to apply a consistent amount of pressure. So I kind of use my upper body. Inconsistent pressure can lead to holes because if you pull your gun out too soon while it's still going, then those scissors, especially if you have a cut pile gun, those scissors might start cutting your fabric instead of the yarn. So you want to press into the fabric, maintain that pressure going up, and do not retract your pressure until your finger is off the trigger and you've completed your line. Then you can pull it out. Another thing that we want to avoid is moving the gun in a diagonal direction. When you press the gun in, you want to look at this nose here. and use these lines as your guiders. If the nose is pointing up, then you need to be moving up. So if you want to move diagonally, you need to turn your gun and move diagonally. It could lead to a hole by like moving the gun in a way that's not where the nose is pointing. I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Tuft the World. Tuft the World, also known as tuftinggun.com, offers a wide range of tufting supplies, including tufting guns, tufting fabric, backing fabric, yarn cones. They just put a new backing fabric in the shop that is very similar to the secondary backing fabric that I used in one of my process videos, which I'm really excited about. They also sell incredible yarn, which I'm obsessed with and use exclusively. The colors are honestly so inspiring. The team at Tuft the World really goes above and beyond to help tufters on their journeys, answering questions, and together we actually collaborated on the content of today's video. So thank you so much to Tuft the World. Next problem, my yarn is not staying in the cloth. So once again, make sure your cloth is super, super, super tight. And then what I think the most common problem is for this issue is you're not applying enough pressure. So as I said in our last issue, really should be pushing some of your upper body weight into the fabric so that the nose is completely submerged into the fabric. You need to maintain a consistent pressure the entire time you're tufting, and then only pull out when you've let go of the trigger. Another issue that might be happening is your yarn feeding system is getting snagged on something, and so the yarn is being pulled in the opposite direction that it needs to be, which is causing the yarn to kind of fall out of the fabric because it's kind of getting pulled in like two directions. You want to make sure that you have a proper yarn feeding system, which I have here. So here we have our yarn spun on cones, which is really helpful. Screw eye hooks are directly above them, which allows the yarn to come off of the cones seamlessly while the yarn gets pulled through the gun. Nothing here that it can get caught on. My feeding system is pretty good. So if you've tried all of those things and you use a loop pile gun and you're still having trouble, I would suggest increasing the pile height of your gun. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Your yarn might not be staying in the fabric because the pile height is so low that it just falls out very easily. Speaking of the loop pile gun, our next tufting trouble is the loops aren't a consistent height. What most likely has happened here is that your gun got stuck in one part of the fabric and it pushed more yarn through than what a single loop would need. So it pushed essentially multiple loops of yarn through, which resulted in one large loop. These aren't really a huge deal because you can go back and trim those long loops. It's nice to try to avoid that from happening by making sure that you're, again, using consistent pressure and that you are not stopping while your finger is still on the trigger. So if you do stop, make sure you're releasing that trigger so that yarn stops getting fed through the gun. And just like every other problem, make sure your fabric is super, super, super tight and make sure it is of good quality, like the tufting fabric from tuftinggun.com. If you are using a monk's cloth, you might run into this issue with a loop pile because the gun is more susceptible to getting stuck in one place due to the grid of the fabric not being generous enough and allowing like holes to be created for the gun to fit in. Our next problem, my yarn keeps falling out of my gun. This is literally the most annoying thing. And when I was first starting out, this happened to me all the time because I didn't have a proper yarn feeding system that I will continue to say will change your tufting game. I swear, you need a really good yarn setup. If you use bundles from the craft store, I highly, highly, highly suggest buying a yarn winder and yarn cones and feeding them onto yarn cones. This will seriously seriously, help prevent the yarn from getting pulled out of your gun, because there's nothing for it to get snagged on when your feeding system is set up properly. So the next problem you might experience is your machine is beeping. What that means when your machine beeps is something is not working properly. So the gun is not able to work how it's supposed to. So that might look like maybe yarn has gotten stuck in your gears. It will beep to say like, I literally can't move anymore. The way that I've solved that is I've started feeding my yarn from my left-hand side. The gears that would snag my yarn, I think, are on the right side of the machine. I think like this piece here is kind of the culprit that catches it. Feeding from my left side, which this guides from the left anyways, so it's creating an angle outward, really setting you up to keep the yarn away from the machine. Or another time that my gun has beeped at me is when I'm tufting in a place on the fabric that is particularly dense already. It has created a lot of tension within one little spot of the fabric, and trying to push my gun in is really difficult because it's already very dense with yarn in that area. It will beep to say like, we can't push our scissors through, or we can't push the nose through. And it might also kind of like push you out of the fabric. If you're creating too much density and the gun can't do what it's supposed to do, you might be using yarn that's too thick. For example, I've tried to use 3 strings of yarn in here instead of 2, and that's really pushing it. It really tightens up those fibers in the fabric so the gun can't properly do its job. If you are experiencing this issue a lot, then maybe your yarn is too thick. Maybe you're just tufting too much in one concentrated area. So you should just be able to space your lines out more. Use thinner yarn if your yarn is pretty thick, and that should solve that problem. So this last tufting trouble is one that I ran into, I think, a few months into using my cut pile gun, and that is that it stopped cutting. So it would create loops in some spots instead of cuts, which is actually super noticeable on the rug side because the color of the yarn tends to look different in a cut versus a loop. And so those loops really stick out, and I would have to like go through and trim all of them. But luckily, Tuff the World has a demonstration video of what to do to fix the problem. It's super easy. You use an Allen wrench to move one part of the gun up here. Ever since I made that tiny little adjustment, I never have this issue. Alright, that is going to be it for today's video. If I didn't get to some of the troubles that you've been experiencing, please comment down below and I would love to address them in another video or help you out in the comment section. I really love to see people sharing their information, sharing their tips in the comments below because, you know, we're all doing this together. We're all learning this craft together. So yeah, just remember that you're not alone in your struggles and be patient with yourself. Maintain that curious mindset, and I promise you will be making high quality, awesome, rad, inspiring rugs in no time. If you aren't subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Yeah, you can stay up to date on all of my future tufting videos. All right, y'all, good luck on your projects, and I will talk to you soon.